We on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot, season number 5, episode number 11. And man, I hope you guys have had a great weekend as we mosey on into the week. Man, I hope you guys were able to kind of let your head down, chill out, and relax. I know we started off the week so far. I know you got over the case of the Mondays and the case of the Tuesdays. And so this weekend, there was a lot going on across the sporting landscape that we're going to get into. And first and foremost, if you're first time listening, we on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot. We provide high-five takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in once again. As I mentioned, there was a lot going on across the sporting landscape. National Football League, we had week number 5 that concluded. We also, too, had Major League Baseball, man, getting out of that wild card round into the division round. I'm not going to get into them damn Cubs, man. Oh, my Lord, man. Down 2-0 to the Brewers. Congratulations to the Brewers. Win the first 2 games of that series, man. I just had to go ahead and get that up off the chest, man, as we looking and staring down elimination. So, we'll get into a little bit of Major League Baseball as well as, obviously, as you know, the other on the AL side, you got Toronto up 2-0 against the New York Yankees, as they'll be playing here shortly just to see if the Yanks can survive just in that one. And, you got Seattle and Detroit, locking horns as well. That game is being played as we're spitting this podcast out to you. Also, we got NBA back into the fold, man. Yeah, we ain't spoke NBA in a hot minute. National Basketball Association on preseason mode as teams. Camps have started back. It's starting to kind of ramp up a little bit as far as the early part of the preseason for the NBA. So, we're going to have that official NBA preview show, man. We're going to have that jump off next week for you guys where I break down, just my thoughts across the whole National Basketball Association for the 2015-2016 season. But man, let's get into the game last night. Obviously we had the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars on Monday Night Football. Jaguars was able to knock off the Kansas City Chiefs. Big epic win, say, for that Jacksonville organization. One, just to showing they real. They're 4-1 now in the season. Trevor Lawrence has been a lot of dirt thrown on his name the last couple of years because he hadn't really been playing like the number 1 pick of the National Football League a couple seasons ago. Liam Cohen, taking that head coaching job this season. A lot of people thought that, Jacksonville finally kind of turned over the leaf. They had a few other organizational changes. I think Tony Baselli, a Hall of Fame offensive lineman for them, is up in the front office as well. So things are clicking pretty good, man. And this is a coming of age type of moment for the Jacksonville Jaguars. From a standpoint of, is that one, they're 3-0 at home on the season, so you protect your home. The AFC South is a winnable division. You got the Indianapolis Colts. They just straight dump truck the Las Vegas Raiders this weekend as well. So those 2 teams are battling at the top in the AFC South. So things getting a little bit interesting, man, across the National Football League. Say this week number 5 was a lot of, epic matchups or epic. I wouldn't say they were upsets, but some games that in some teams you saw that, hey, look, we real out here. We trying to be some contenders out here. So I thought that was interesting in week number 5. Also, breaking news on the NFL tip is that Joe, and I'm not talking about Burrow, but Joe Flacco has been traded from the Cleveland Browns up to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals just can't do it no more, I guess, with Jake Browning. He's had a fair opportunity to try to take the helm for the Cincinnati Bengals while Joe Burrow's on the mend, and, just been 3 games in a row for this team. Just 3 L's in a row since Joe Burrow has been out. So they bring in Flacco. One thing about Joe Flacco is that, yeah, he's an old man, he's an OG, but he ain't afraid to throw the football. And I think that, for Cincinnati, they trying to do whatever they can, man, to stay competitive before Joe Burrow comes back at some point during this season. So, I just thought that was just an interesting trade. Just show how thirsty and frustrated Zach Taylor, because he knows his job is at stake at this point. So, big time hustle move for them. I actually like the move. And I think that, once you are in a situation where you still kind of contending, then you do whatever you got to do, man, to keep your head above water before, Joe Burrow come back into the fold. So, I thought that trade was interesting. Other breaking news across the National Football League is Odell Beckham Jr. And I was thinking about Odell just a couple weeks ago, like, man, where's Odell at? Well, Odell will be serving a 6-game suspension for PED use. He accepts his suspension from the National Football League. He's a guy that's battled injuries over the last couple of years. Definitely not the same guy. No disrespect to Odell Beckham Jr. because I thought that he's an exciting, player. He's an exciting personality. He's good for the National Football League. But one thing about the NFL, man, it's not for long, and it's the get hurt business. And if you're a guy that's perennially hurt, you're not going to be able to be at 100% of your talent. And we've seen that the last couple of years for OBJ, man. So hopefully he can, serve his suspension, and maybe at some point, during the season, latter part of the season, if a team trying to get a veteran receiver on their roster, might kick the tires on Odell Beckham Jr. So we'll definitely, see what that do, moving forward for him. But I was kind of surprised to, see that whole thing come down the pipeline. And then later on tonight, WNBA. We got the Las Vegas Aces taking on the Phoenix Mercury, as the Aces is up 2-0 in this series. This game is going to be played tonight, which is, once this come out, actually the game will be on at that point. But tonight could be the night for the Las Vegas Aces. They were the best team in WNBA all this season, and they got the MVP of Aja Wilson. And so, to me, I think they close it out tonight, man. I just think that they're just a better team, better than, the even though the Mercury are favored at home, and the Mercury got some G's too. Don't get it twisted. These games have been kind of competitive until, the Aces kind of pulled it out, towards the latter part of the second half in both of these basketball games so far. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mercury, don't fall on their sword tonight. But I got the Aces, man, winning the championship, man, in the sweep. I just think that Aja Wilson, just all the pieces that they got, just across the board for the Aces, they're the most, talented team. I think in the league as a collective. And so I see them, winning a championship tonight. And so, man, we ain't going to hold you, man. We're going to get right into it, man. Coming up, I got week number 5. We'll take a nice little tour of duty across week number 5 of the National Football League season. First and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. All right, we're going to get into it, man. Week number 5 across the National Football League. This was an interesting week. On paper coming in, it was a bunch of teams that was matched up against each other that it wasn't really kind of those, I wouldn't say epic matchups, but like those matchups between like two last year playoff team type of vibe. We really didn't have this in week number 5, but it was some good football nevertheless. Everything jumped off on Thursday where you had the San Francisco 49ers knocking off the Los Angeles Rams. These are two teams that, one, they're in familiar territory, in the same division, the NFC West. So, it's a rivalry jumping off. Both these teams came into this week 3-1 on the year. The 49ers just coming in as a walking mass unit. Brock Purdy out. You had Mac Jones starting again for the San Francisco 49ers. So they had, obviously George Kittle was out, due to injured reserve, IR. So he'll probably be back in a couple of weeks. But, you really didn't know kind of what San Francisco team from the offensive standpoint was going to give you. And they came out early in the game, and Christian McCaffrey, as long as he's healthy, he's arguably the best back in the National Football League. With the versatility, he showed that in the first half of this football game. The Los Angeles Rams is a team that with Sean McVay, they're going to be in every single football game regardless of who they match up with. And they've been in a couple nail biters so far. We all remember, last week outing with the Philadelphia Eagles against the Rams, Eagles with the block, field goal winning the game at the end, and the Rams, fell on the sword this week in overtime, 26-23. The Niners, I will give, just credit to their organization, not let go of the rope early in the season, knowing that they got injuries, and just the job that they have done as a whole organization. Kyle Shanahan, obviously being the front man, the football club, I think that he's kind of kept his team, even keeled, even tempered. And, right now they 4-1. And, we'll see what Brock Purdy do if he's going to play in week number 6 coming up. But it was a big-time victory, especially against a division foe. And sneaky enough also is that the Niners, they undefeated on the road so far this season, 3-0 on the road. So shout out to them. We'll see, what they do, coming up. But good time victory for the San Francisco 49ers. This team is also getting healthy too, as these weeks kind of go on and on. So this team could be back on that old swag up in San Francisco. We'll see what Kyle Shanahan and the Niners do moving forward for the rest of the season. Then we had another matchup that, this was a game that I was zeroed in on, sat back and watched this entire football game, flicked a little bit also too, shout out and courtesy to Red Zone. But, this game I was locked in on, the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Denver Broncos. Eagles came into this game 4-0 the year. There's been a lot of talk in Philadelphia, even with those 4 victories, about the whole situation with A.J. Brown, with Devontae Smith, really them not throwing the football, Jalen Hurts, them, kind of being just a one-man show because Saquon Barkley hadn't really, played up to his level so far this season as well. But we all thought everything was good with the Philadelphia Eagles. And then Denver, which is a team that coming in, we all knew that they was going to come to try to get it. I just think that, for me with Bo Nix, he's still, in his second year. And, he's been all right so far this season. But, I just think that for this whole organization, these are the type of wins, especially if you're trying to be a contender, you got to go on the road into the Champions Den and be able to pull it out. And the Broncos pulled it out 21-17. We all know about the ballsy call, that the Broncos did, man, going for that 2. I was screaming at the TV like, man, I would have took my 1, especially in the fourth quarter where they scored a touchdown. They was down by 1. They went for the 2 to go up, 17-18. And then they was able to kind of pull it off, after that. I think Sean Payton, he's a guy we seen him go for onside kicks and, in the Super Bowl, he's down in New Orleans. And so I wasn't really surprised. And, this was a gutsy win for them. A lot of people kind of put it on the Eagles, but I think this was more of a Denver Broncos type of, hey, we out here type of victory for them. So congratulations to them. For Philadelphia, still not being able to run the football. Devontae Smith, he had a good day, over 100 yards, receiving for him. Jalen Hurts had, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. So on paper, things looked all good. But, A.J. Brown, he was a little bit in the offense. I think he had about 4 or 5 catches in this football game. But this team in the second half, man, the past 2 weeks have been anemic. I mean, it just seemed like they get the lead in these football games and then they just let off the gas like they get bored. And that's kind of part of what I call the fat cat-itis. These teams out here that's just, just out here. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, we know we the champions. We think teams should bow down to us. And then what happens is you get the lingering and that team come back and try to snake bite you like Tampa almost did last week for the Eagles. So they fall to 4-1 on the year, break their home winning streak. For the Broncos, good situation for them, especially in that AFC West, because the Chargers, a lot of people thought, they was going to be, kind of moving and grooving during this part of the year, but that hasn't really been the case. The Chargers lost 2 games in a row. So right now, the Broncos in the lead in the division tied, with Los Angeles with the Chargers. So, that division is up for grabs. We'll get into KC a little bit later, who was also 2 in that AFC West, but big time victory for the Denver Broncos, man, as they move on to 3-2 on the year. And then it's a game I want to get into, man, that I don't think as a fan we didn't know what to expect. It's a game played down there in Baltimore, man, with the Houston Texans taking on the Baltimore Ravens. The Texans, they're a team that offensive line is shaky. C.J. Stroud, he's been all right so far this season, just about average. The run game, Nick Chubb out there still being a wonder out there. This defense is a good defense, but they hadn't been able to kind of put the pieces together. When they came into this game 1-3 on the year, Baltimore came into this game 1-3 on the year. Who would have imagined that? Especially if we had this conversation at least 2 years or a year and a half ago, we wouldn't have thought that. Now, Lamar Jackson didn't play in this football game, and the Houston Texans straight steamrolled the Baltimore Ravens 44-10. C.J. Stroud, 4 touchdowns. He had an outstanding day, 244 yards passing, just was surgical with that thing. Baltimore, man, this is a team that, to quote Samuel Jackson, man, from the movie Juice back in 1992, man, they slid down a razor blade into an alcohol river. They may have the worst defense in the National Football League next to the Dallas Cowboys, or the defensive coordinator for Baltimore. I hope he ain't buy a crib in Baltimore, because it's going to be a short, stint for him in Baltimore. This defense is terrible, especially when you got Pro Bowl and big time, $100 million men type of personnel that you got on the defensive end. Now, mind you, they have had some injuries. Don't get it twisted. But the Baltimore Ravens that I know, the Ray Lewis Baltimore Ravens, and John Harbaugh, going back when he kind of first got there, they were a team that didn't make excuses, and they were a team that had enough talent on it to where if a couple guys go down on the defensive end, they still able to hold the fort down. Not the case in this situation. A lot of people saying that John Harbaugh's seat should be hot. I mean, he's the second longest tenured coach in the National Football League. I don't think that one bad season make you just fall on the guillotine. Steve Bisciotti, who's the owner of the Baltimore Ravens, he, for what all I know, has got a good relationship with John Harbaugh. But man, this thing is not looking good. I'm not gonna put them straight in the grave. But, man, they starting to get a little bit on life support. I think that what helps them out is that the AFC that hasn't really been, a front runner, as far as outside of Buffalo, obviously, coming into this week undefeated. But there's some good teams in the AFC that don't have the record that we would think they would have. And part of that is just simply the schedule as well. There's been some good matchups, tough matchups, especially on the AFC side early in this season. We're seeing the remnants of that so far through the first 5 weeks. So Baltimore may have a chance, man, to do something maybe later on this season. Obviously, it's all about Lamar Jackson. He got a hamstring injury. They got to get him back on the field, whenever he's healthy. And so Baltimore, yeah, it ain't looking good. So we'll see what it do. But congratulations to the Texans. They moved to 2-3 on the year. And another game, man, I'm going to get into, man, is the Tennessee Titans took on the Arizona Cardinals. Titans were able to win this game 22-21. Shout out to Cam Ward, man, his first victory in the National Football League. Big time throw to Calvin Ridley towards the end of this football game. It didn't have crazy numbers, 265 yards. You had one pick, but, at the end of the day, it was good for the Rook to get a victory. And for the Cardinals, man, D-Mercado, man, we've seen this the last couple of weeks. I just don't understand. You know how hard it is, one, to even suit up to play in the National Football League. Two, be able to make a play where you running scot-free. Nobody behind you. You ain't got to elude nobody. Just clean pastures. And you drop the ball before the goal line. I'm just going to say this. If I was a head coach in the National Football League, if any one of my players did that, they're not coming back into the game. You done for the day. Because what happens is, in my opinion, you showed up the whole football club, dude. This guy's out there, man, that's, trying to get it in, working real hard on both sides of the football to try to help their team win, man. And that's just inexcusable. I can understand a guy dropping a pass. I can understand a guy even fumbling, because at least the guy ain't trying to fumble. The ball get popped out sometimes. It be like that. But to be just clear straight in the end zone, make sure you cross the end zone, dude. And the NFL allow you to dance now. You do whatever you want to do after you score. Secure the bag first, man. So, yeah, man. So, congratulations once again to the Titans. Their first victory of the year. The Cardinals, this is a team that's anemic, straight up and down. Kyler Murray, good some weeks, okay certain weeks. This is a team that I just don't know. They just the epitome of an enigma, man, as they dropped to 2-3 on the year for the Cardinals. And so we'll see what both these teams do moving forward. Then another one, man, this was a classic game. And I knew it when I previewed this game coming into the week. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveling out to Seattle to take on the Seattle Seahawks. 50th anniversary for both of these organizations. They both came in the National Football League in the 1976 season. So, two new kids on the block back in the, mid to late 70s. And congratulations to the organizations. Both of them have won, Super Bowls in the tenure in the National Football League. So it was a good little matchup. We got the creamsicle jerseys, too, by Tampa. It was a good look. And so, definitely, man, this one 38-35. Tampa was able to win this football game. It was close to out. You had two quarterbacks, both these guys, man, in their third home, and it's both worked out for both of them. Baker Mayfield, man, putting on the cape again. 2 touchdowns, 379 yards. Big time drive towards the end of the field, man, for them to secure that bag in the fourth quarter as the Bucs able to improve to 4-1 on the year. Bucs is another team out here that's 3-0 on the road. And so, well, I'm loving what I'm seeing down there in Tampa. They bounce back. They could easily be undefeated right now, but it's a lesson learned. So congratulations to them. And the Seahawks, they dropped to 3-2 on the year. Still shout out to Sam Darnold. He had a good football game, so, it really wasn't on him. Defense, you give up 38 points at home, and more than likely you're going to lose that football game. So we'll definitely, see what both these teams do moving forward. And then, and I'm not going to really get all the way into this game, but I'm going to mention it just simply based on the fact is that we got a trade in the National Football League as the Cincinnati Bengals acquired Joe Flacco, which I mentioned a little bit earlier in the intro. But, they were able to get knocked off. Well, they got knocked off by the Detroit Lions 37-24. This is a team with the Bengals. I'm not sure if Joe Flacco is going to cure all the ills. But, they're imbalanced on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. I mean, the offensive line is straight, hot as garbage. The defense, from a standpoint of there was no way but up from last season. The Lions are a big-time offense. I mean, they put a 30-piece on a lot of teams out here. But at the end of the day, the Cincinnati Bengals, they 2-3 on the year. I do think it's a wise move, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, to bring in Joe Flacco, at least get Jake Brown in some kind of competition and let him know that, hey, dude, we trying to hold this fort down till Joe Burrow come back, man. So we'll see what that do moving forward. And we had the Sunday night football game between the Buffalo Bills and the New England Pats. Last final season for the Buffalo Bills in the stadium as they move to a new digs next season. This is an AFC East rivalry that goes way, way back to, the Belichick days and, just kind of early 2000s, mid 2000s. And so it's always, good, especially, for the two fan bases, kind of the lock horns in this divisional matchup. But the Patriots knocked the Buffalo Bills out of the undefeated ranks, winning this football game 23-20. Man, Drake May, and if you look at his stats, 273 yards and no touchdowns, you would think, man, playing against the Buffalo Bills, you would take an L. But the Patriots, to me, they MVP was on the defensive side of the ball. They held the Buffalo Bills to 20 points. Big time win for them. Josh Allen, he didn't have what I call one of those typical Josh Allen games, even though, he's going to make plays every time he, get on the football field. And I had questions about this offense a little bit, and I'm talking about the Bills from a perspective of is that they still don't have a number one receiver. And speaking of receivers, Coleman got into it with one of the coaches, I believe, on the sideline. And so that's something that for me, for Buffalo, could potentially come back to burn them, but I don't know. I mean, Josh Allen's been playing some great football, but in this league, the deeper you go, especially in the playoffs and in the season, your weaknesses come to the top. But this was more so the New England Patriots, man, and Drake May, congratulations, Mike Vrabel. He's a super OG out here, played for the New England Patriots, obviously, as well as, coach for the Tennessee Titans, a couple years ago. This is a good win, man, for Robert Kraft and the whole organization. Just to show, hey, look, at the end of the day, we moving on from the Belichick era. So this was a good little situation, man, for the Pats, man, winning that game on Sunday night. And then we're going to close it out with Monday night football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars down there in Duval County. This was an interesting one for me. I had the Jaguars winning this game coming in because even though the Chiefs, they knocked off the Baltimore Ravens is a punching bag right now. And so to me, the Chiefs still haven't proved so far, talking about this season, that they can beat a upper echelon type of team. And I'm not calling Jacksonville an upper echelon type of team, but I'm talking about a team that is looking to knock you off, that has weapons good enough to knock you off, and it's about executing the game plan. Jaguars able to win this one 31-28. Now they almost tried to let this one get away. Trevor Lawrence, tripping over his feet, getting up, falling again like he, a middleweight out here trying to beat the standing 8 count. Running the ball into the into the end zone, man. Big time play at the end of the game. This is another big time victory for a young football team, this week. And that was kind of the theme of this week. Young teams out here showing that, hey, this NFL is season to season. Just because you were a playoff team last year don't make you one this year. And the Jaguars improved to 4-1 on the year, 3-0 at home. Protecting that home turf in the AFC South. I think the AFC South, them in Indianapolis, It's their division really to lose. And shout out to the Texans. They had a big victory too, so I know they'll be still kind of in the mix in there, man. But congratulations to them. For the Chiefs, like I said, man, these teams that you're going up against, they want all the smoke. And it get to a point when you're what I call a legendary kind of team where people are not scared of you no more. And I think that's where we're kind of at with the Chiefs. Now, they've had some injuries and so forth, but when you at the top, like the Chiefs has been, for the last, 5 to 7 years, teams ain't got no mercy for you when you got guys out there injured, man. And Patrick Mahomes is only so much this guy can do. So congratulations to the Jacksonville Jaguars pulling this game out 31-28. And so, man, that's my look across week number 5 across the National Football League, man. We'll get into, what the coming week 6 do on Friday's show. But once again, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate your ear. We on Fire Sports Podcast spot. Before we get out of here, man, don't forget to check us out on Facebook. We on Fire Sports Podcast. Also, too, on Facebook, We on Fire Sports Podcast. Also on X and Twitter at We on Fire Sports. On Podbean as well. And also where all podcasts can be listened to. And can't forget about YouTube out here as well. And before we get out of here, I got a Big 5. Yes, my Big 5 NFL teams through the first 5 weeks of the NFL season. I will say this, man, coming into this Big 5, there's some teams that, we wouldn't have thought beginning of the season that these teams would be in the Big 5 or at least one of these teams. But that's the NFL, man. Everything be changing, man. Not for long out here, man. It's that, ain't no we just holding it down forever in these Big 5 power rankings. Some teams we'll see. But this week, man, we got a couple new entries. And so we're going to get right into it, man. Coming in at number 5. At number 5, man, and I'm not going to be a prisoner of the moment. I know that this team was the last team of the week to get them a victory. But, yeah, I'm going down to Duval County, man, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The reason I got the Jaguars at number 5, because it's not really about the prisoner of the moment, about the victory last night. This team and their defense, they're able to create turnovers. I think that the defense has been ahead of the offense for this team. But I think that the offense needed a victory like last night. A victory where they're able to put up 30-plus points against a good football team and the Kansas City Chiefs, historically good football team. And I think that, how the game played itself out and Trevor Lawrence, being the hero at the end of the game, I think is going to bring their confidence level to a high. And I think they got a new guy in the orchestra, and Liam Cohen. He's an offensive guy. So I think that, those wheels are going to finally turn with Jacksonville, what I see. Now, I'm not saying that, they're a team that's going to go to the Super Bowl out the AFC. But I'm liking what I'm seeing from them. And they in at number 5 on my Big 5 power rankings, man. Congratulations and shout out to the Jaguars, man. Coming in at number 4. At number 4, this is a team that a lot of people through the first week of the season said, man, look, they've lost their offensive coordinator. They lost their defensive coordinator. They just straight got DDT by the Green Bay Packers. What's going on? Rome is burning. Dan Campbell done fell off. And the Lions have just won 4 straight since then, putting up 30 pieces like they did last season. The offense is on one. Actually, the offense is playing better through the first 5 weeks this year than they did last season. And, it's just a mixture, man. They just an orchestra, whether it's Jared Goff, whether it's David Montgomery, whether it's Gibbs, whether it's St. Brown, whether it's LaPorta. That they are kind of revving themselves up. And I think that what has helped the Detroit Lions is that for a team that has been as good as them after the first week of the year, they were kind of like under the radar a little bit, low-key in it a little bit, man. Congratulations to them, man. I got them coming in at number 4. At number 3. This is a team that if you look at their strength of schedule so far this season, they probably had the toughest strength of schedule. This is a team that the last quarter of all of their wins have been comeback wins. Now, they almost had another comeback win last week, but it got folded by a miraculous field goal block, and you already know what I'm talking about. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming in at number 3. This team in Baker Mayfield, man, they just love him down there in Tampa. I had an opportunity to go to their training camp, 2 seasons ago, see, Baker up front, in personal, just their whole, situation down there in Tampa. And, they are a team that, and people forget, they got guys hurt. Mike Evans is still on the mend. Chris Godwin just came back. But Ibuka, oh my Lord, boy. A lot of people saying he was the steal of the draft. A lot of draft nicks was very high on Ibuka. I thought he was a good wide receiver at Ohio State without question. But he's came in and he's, showed what time it was. And it's a big time pickup, for the Bucs just with that draft. Now, Bucky Irvin, he's still kind of banged up a little bit. We'll see what he do moving forward. But I like what I see. Rachaad White had a good, game running back for the Tampa Bay Bucs last week. The defense is playing a little bit better. I think they still got, apex to get up to a little bit. But I'm liking what I'm seeing. Going out there to Seattle, man, knocking off the Seahawks, putting up a 38-piece in their building. So that was impressive to me. And so, man, I got the Bucs coming in at number 3. At number 2, man. At number 2, this is a team that I ain't going to front. I ain't going to say I'm worried about them because this is a team that, they like controversy a little bit. The last 2 weeks hadn't really been as desired in the second half, especially on the offensive side of the football. A team that, for some odd reason, after the first 2 weeks of the year, they just can't run the football effectively. And I'm talking about the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I know they got knocked off last week, and I know a lot of people say, hey, man, should they be a little bit further? Just relax. When they still 4-1 on the year, it wasn't their best, say outing. They let go of the rope, just played laissez-faire in the second half of this football game, and they got burnt by it. They almost got burnt last week by it, messing with Tampa like that. So I think that a team like Philadelphia, they need something like this, man, to get the juices flowing for them, man. So I got them coming in at number 2, man. I still think that with just all the talent that they have, they'll be all right. I think A.J. Brown, it's going to work out in his favor, man, coming up probably in these next couple of games. And so, I'm still confident in this football club, but they needed something. They needed a little, that. I mean, look how many games this team had won. 21 out of the last 22 or something like that? So they got brought down to earth a little bit. It's all to the good, but I got them coming in at number 2. At number one, this is a team, it's probably the only team that, man, since I've been doing these power rankings, my big 5 power rankings, that lost the game and actually went up in the power rankings to the first spot. That's the Buffalo Bills. Now, the reason they're the number 1 spot, because I still think that them and the Eagles are the best 2 teams in the National Football League. I think that the Buffalo Bills losing at home, they only lost by a field goal at home. They had some turnovers, early in that football game that just threw their whole swag off. And so I think they'll be all right. I'm still a little bit concerned about the offense from a passing standpoint, just with the weapons, I still think they need a number 1 receiver. I'm not sure about Coleman. But, I can't front. Like I said, I think that them and Philadelphia are the best 2 teams in the league. I think that even though they lost, they looked a little bit better than Philadelphia did to me, because Philadelphia just fell asleep at the wheel. So I got them coming in at number 1 in my big 5. And this thing is liable to shake up, man, because, I'm liking what I'm seeing from some of these young teams. Can't forget about the Indianapolis Colts, man. They honorable mention. I know people in Indianapolis don't get mad at me, man. It just was between them and the Jags. I like what I see from the Jags so far. Even though the Colts, Jonathan Taylor, man, running. Danny Dimes doing his thing up there. So I'll send a shout out to you guys, man. But that's it. We're going to go ahead and close episode 11, season 5 out. And we appreciate you guys checking in once again. We'll be back at the back end of the week on Friday, man. Preview week number 6 across the National Football League. At that point, we'll probably have a WNBA new champion out here. We'll have, probably be in the not the conference, but the AL championship series and the NL championship series by the weekend. So we'll see what that do, man. And first and foremost, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. Spot.